Welcome back to the Arbitrage Run show with your host Donkey Teeth and Kevin. What's happening, Kevin?
Hey, Donkey. Just got a lot of free time opened up over this weekend.
Yeah, big news. Big news dropped in Zed. We got the world on fire. The platform is a little bit broken, but they're gonna get it fixed. We got a super special show. We advertised Facundo coming on, and I don't know if it's pronounced Facundo or Facundo because our new guest that's filling in is pronouncing it Facundo. So maybe I've been mispronouncing Facundo's name all of this time. I don't know. Hopefully he can clear it up for us. We're really excited to bring Ryan Trost on, the Associate Director of Product at VHS. Zed. Is it Zed or VHS? Which one is it technically?
VHS technically, yeah.
Thanks for coming.
How's it going, guys? Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to it.
Is it Trost or Trost?
Trost, yeah, common misconception. At my previous job when I was a day trader, one of the top traders at the firm just called me Trost the first day. And I was so intimidated by him because he was making like $10+ million a year. I just let it go for 3 years. And by the end, when I was on my way out to start KYH and do all of that, I was like, hey, by the way, this is a funny story, but it's actually Trost.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. Is it Facundo? Is that proper pronunciation?
Well, now you're making me think I may have been mispronouncing it too, but I say Facundo, but it could be Facundo.
The only reason I've said Facundo is the basketball player. I think it was Facundo Campazzo, right, Kevin?
Oh yeah. I had a top shot of him back in the day.
Oh, top shot. Oh man.
That's the top shot that you turned into Princess of Power, right?
Yeah, one of them, I guess. Right. Good flip.
Yeah, it's like a villain origin story. Right.
Yep.
Depends whose perspective, right?
Thanks for coming on short notice, Ryan. Because
yeah, no problem.
Facundo kind of had to bail last minute, some personal issues. He's going to be on next week though, assuming everything goes as planned. So we're still on for that, and you kind of stepped up to the plate. And we got a list of questions we want to ask you, but can we start by kind of talking about what's going on with the site? Tournaments were just canceled for the rest of the week here. We're probably going to drop this on Thursday evening, so we're recording it Thursday morning in the US. Can you give a little bit of clarity, background on what's going on with the site and why things had to be canceled?
Yeah, totally. So, keep in mind in this conversation, I'm not an engineer, right? So my perspective is going to be, from the product side and doing my best to kind of understand all of the core infrastructure that goes into what makes the platform what the platform is. So from the tournament side, right, when we generate tournament races, the tournament system basically makes a call to the underlying racing API to generate the races, right? So on Tuesday, when we ran maintenance, we implemented some caching systems that allow us to basically improve some of the core underlying aspects of the entire site. And what happened was essentially that the tournament creation, when it moves on to the stages of actually creating the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, etc., it calls to the racing API to create the actual races. And essentially what happened was, because it was cached and that was a new implementation that happened on Tuesday, we had that occurrence where it was calling it twice, basically calling it, looking for it again, and then doing it really quickly. And we also had the underlying aspects of gas was extremely volatile last night. So, it's a combination of two things. It's interesting, right? Because we've had a lot of new things coming out on the tournament side. And, your first gut instinct would be, oh, it's, we're moving too quick with the tournaments and, we're trying to implement so many of these features. But, Murphy's Law, it actually ends up being something with the core underlying infrastructure that's designed to improve the overall site experience. And this hiccup is something that we're addressing immediately and need a little bit of time to get through.
Did they try clearing the cache? Is that?
Oh, yeah, right. It's so funny when you think about it that way. You're like, oh, this is gonna be great, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. A lot of changes going on, a lot of exciting new formats, and everything changing all at once. I guess it is to a certain extent to be expected. I know a lot of people frustrated out there, but I'm sure we'll get back on track. I guess getting into the questions that we had prepared for you. So you are somebody that we've known for a while. You got into Zed around the same time as us. You created Know Your Horses with your partner Tyler there, and Zed ended up buying you guys out, and you've been on the Zed team for a little over 6 months now.
Yeah, I think I'm coming up on, so it was June. Yeah, almost 8 months actually. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience going from player to employee over there? Because I mean, I know like back in what was it, the summer of 2021, like we were all super frustrated with Zed, like everything had like slowed to a halt. And you went through that experience, and then now you're on the other side and you see other people frustrated with the pace of progress, even though, from our perspective, having been here for so long, it's actually progressing much quicker than it used to. But I think it becomes hard to see the forest for the trees, and it's all relative to how long you've been in Zed and what you've seen and experienced. So really curious, being on the other side, if you have any like big takeaways or perspective that you can share.
Yeah, definitely, right? So like you think about no matter at what time you joined Zed, right? Your user journey is going to be exemplified maybe by, the key events that have happened since your tenure, right? So for us and the people who joined in that initial NFT boom and the spring and summer of 2021, we have gone through a lot, right? We've gone through, breeding changes, racing changes, tournaments, odds removal, flames. So along the way, we've seen a lot of different, like, let's call them meta games, right? Like how the current version of the game is starting to translate to, whatever different play styles are going to be the most important. And along the way, that's basically what is defining, the player's understanding of what success is on the platform. And when it seems difficult to kind of, recognize where the goalposts are at any time, that's kind of seems to be like a consistent source of frustration. But at the same time, we think about all of these new features coming out as trying to make the platform, more sustainable for the long-term growth of the product. And, from the inside, well, I guess from the perspective of coming from the outside to the inside, I know as a player, one of the things that I was, oftentimes wondering is, what is the reason for why some things aren't being developed that from an idea conceptualization stage seem very simple for us, right? As a player, we were thinking a lot about, class system redesigns, different formats that should be on the platform. And you don't always necessarily understand what the key infrastructure requirements will be to support those ideas. And on top of that, understanding, human capital constraints and kind of how the internal infrastructure of the company is running in order to deliver on those different product pipelines. So, from my perspective, the first thing that I did when I joined is I told Facundo, I was like, let me get on as many meetings as I can to try and understand, the core level of where the product is in terms of, I have all these ideas in my head that I would love for us to implement ASAP, right? I can think of a million different things that we should do to try and make the platform more sustainable. But I first need to understand what we're actually capable of at any given time. And that's one of the things that's really difficult to see from the outside because, not everybody gets to see behind the curtains of how companies are run in any respect. And I found like a pretty rational like placement into the live ops area of the product. So started out there basically working with that team and letting them know like one of the most important things from my perspective was starting to design the live game to actually allow for there to be a place for different profiles of horses, right? So, throughout that, 2021 year and 2022, a lot of the work from the community and the players was kind of identifying horse profiles and trying to figure out, as quickly as possible, what mold does this specific racehorse fit into, right? And how does that define, what I should do in terms of race selection, in terms of, fee tier selection. And that was kind of it, right? It was a unilateral experience where, the tournaments were Fibonacci, podium plate, and not really having any level of dynamic changes on how point structures work. Like they all kind of allocated towards, the horses that were really consistent, right? So we saw that shift in the platform. And my goal immediately was to try and get to a point where we could design the live game to kind of target different cohorts, right? Variance horses that, were oftentimes finishing even in third and fourth when we had pity point before the class system was redesigned. And then on top of that, in terms of race formats, we had top 3 as like the only format on the site for, years. And the first thing that I was kind of filling everybody in on was like how I felt like we needed to be able to have different race events that would meet different requirements and desires and motivations of the controllers of the horses, right? So live ops is really like a blend of what are the players' motivations? What are their desires? What are they looking for to get out of the platform at any given time? And from, a business perspective, what are the types of events that are going to stimulate the overall ecosystem in a way that's sustainable on our end? And top three really targets a very specific type of horse. You guys know that, better than anyone. So one of the first things we did was start to think about, okay, we need there to be a quicker feedback loop of actually racing, right? So 6-horse races were tested, and obviously quite a success in terms of how quick they are to turn around. I think if you judge by when we ran the 6-horse free tournament last weekend during the flash events, like it was popping off, right? Like races were filling like crazy. We did our best to kind of maintain the demand with the schedule. But even that, it was like, there are races at one point were filling so fast, like they were oversubscribing. So, we're learning as we go from a live ops perspective, because we really are trying to like break the mold of what the live game is at any given time. Because if we ever end up in that stale type of environment where, yeah, it's super consistent and like, what to expect, but at the same time, that has compounding expectations, right? Like if it's always going to be the exact same tournament, by definition, it's going to be the exact same horses winning. It's going to be the exact same stables winning. And while that works really well for X percentage of the population of players, our goal is to really be able to activate on less of a racehorse level, right? A lot of the designs of live ops have been targeting different cohorts of horses. We've kind of notched that down, in my opinion, at this point. There's certainly still formats that could be introduced, and maybe there needs to be some parity between 6-horse and 12-horse event types. But at the end of the day, we really are trying to get to a point where we're paying closer attention to exactly like who's succeeding in different formats and who has the opportunity to grow into a level of success along the way. That's like the core zeitgeist of the new racing systems, right? Like the new class system allows you to actually move vertically through the system and see some level of success depending on, the decisions that you made along the way.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I kind of introed you as the associate director of product, but didn't quite get into the live ops stuff. And I feel like should clarify. I didn't really know what live ops was. People just kind of started talking about live ops like everybody should know what it is. I had to Google it just so anybody out there, like if anybody's like me, live ops, like what pops up when you Google live ops meaning is live operations, and it's a style of game management and operations that treats a game as a live service and continually delivers new features, updates, promotions, in-game events, and improvements to the launched game to improve the experience for the player community. So, by that definition, it's something that we should all be a big fan of. All that stuff sounds good. So that's kind of what you're spearheading over there. But Kevin, I'll kick it over to you. Why don't you take the next couple questions?
Yeah, sounds good. I feel like, Ryan, you just touched on a number of our questions, but
Oh,
the
yeah.
one I wanted to ask
I'm sure that'll happen.
I know. The one I wanted to ask first was, I know this week we had the introduction of the best of tournaments, right? And I think that was a really cool addition where it rewarded volume on the site, free and paid. You can do it for both. It opens up the door for a lot of different opportunities. I know one headache came in that I think it was a 6-gate tournament where it was a best of 3, and everyone was tied essentially. So it was just who could grind their horse into the ground the most and qualify. Like, where are we at with the best of tiebreakers? I know most races is kind of the default we've always used. Is there any thought to changing that? And is there like a timeline we should expect something new?
Yeah, for sure. I think something that I have been doing my best to do in Discord and on socials, but I'd like to do kind of in a formal manner, is like kind of speak a little bit about the idea conceptualization of best of and kind of the limitations that we had from the all races system. So, when you're thinking about tournament qualifying for a very long time, like honestly, since the inception of tournaments, that minimum race number has almost unilaterally been exactly where every single qualifier has stopped at, right? And it's often because that 6th race usually poses some level of potential detriment depending on the type of horse that you're racing, right? Like if you have a super consistent horse, yeah, that 6th race might not be bad because you're averaging, 3rd, 2nd, even 1st, depending on if it's free or paid and depending on the quality of the racehorse, right? So that 6th race might not be that necessarily disadvantageous to you. But at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that we helped eliminate the feeling of a one race and done mentality, right? Because the fact of the matter is we kind of have like two like a spectrum of, variance, right? Like there's horses who have none and are very consistent on where they place, and then there's some that go all over the place. And for a very long time, tournaments really completely neglected that aspect of the ecosystem, right? Because you would race once and get a 12th and know, the cut lines are going to be so high for this Fibonacci because there's, only this many qualifiers. And, even some of the top horses in the game were, and especially now that we have like an actual distribution of class system, there's class 3, 4, 2 horses who can dominate paid racing. But then when it gets to tournaments, which are arguably the most exciting feature on the platform, they have no opportunity to really succeed over a long period of time because of simply the way that the scoring average system was conceptualized, right? It's been that way for a very long time where it's just averaging the scores as you go. And the side effect of that is whatever that minimum race is exactly the stopping point, right? Like you could look at the data and see how many horses who qualified and ran at least 5 races were going over that 5 race number. And it's dramatically low, right? So the pendulum kind of swung with the best of format on its initial release, right? Because the idea was, okay, you race once. My idea as a designer is I want you to know that you should continue that effort, right? We want to give you the opportunity to see how that goes throughout the entire block of qualifying races, right? Like we don't want you to have to race once and have that negative feedback loop of, that single individual event being the one that completely derails your entire experience for that day on the platform. So that's the idea of conceptualization, right? So now in terms of implementation, the tiebreaker logic is really the bottleneck, right? Because depending on what that best of number is, there's some level of balance between this is way too many races to manage the number of horses that I'm interested in racing on the day, or the best of is, too small given the format where, there's only 48 qualifiers. How many horses are going to be able to win 3 races out of 20, right? If you double up on stamina. So that's kind of the situation that we're seeing. So the direction that we're going is twofold, right? In terms of overall lift, right? In terms of overall lift, we want to make sure that in the short term, we can get the best of scoring to least number of races as quickly as possible, right? And the idea there is that it's at least a stopgap solution to the feeling of this is just a resource deployment opportunity where, oh, I can double up on my schedule. My horse is consistent and I know that I'm going to get, 10 to 15% win rate over X number of races. If I double up and race fatigued and the tiebreaker, I can get those 3 or 5 wins over 20 races, even 25 if I'm running fatigued. And I'm going to have such a higher number because I'm just spamming entries. So like on our end, right, we're seeing unbelievable amounts of volumes on those days, but the user experience isn't what best of was designed for. It's designed to make it so your qualifying isn't limited by the minimum race number, right? There isn't like this, you have to stop at 5 because if you go to 6 or 7 or whatever number it is over the minimum number, you are going to have no chance if whatever the outcome of that race is detrimental to you. So with least races being the tiebreaker, if you get that 12th as your first race, you do still know that you can continue through the qualifying process. Sure, you might not top the leaderboard because, we might end up getting people who go 5 for 5. My idea is some of the best horses on the platform will probably stop at 5 because if they place at the top of the leaderboard, they're not incentivized to keep going. But it does incentivize the horses who want to try and make the cut line and might require a few more opportunities, might require a little bit better race selection, etc., to get into those cut lines. It does allow them the opportunity to do so. So that's kind of in the super short term, right? And then outside of that, and in terms of implementation, like it's basically built. We're doing some dev testing just to iron out any potential kinks. It's kind of the first time we've modified tiebreakers in quite some time, so we need to make sure that those systems are operating correctly. But soft launch. My goal is to have it for when tournaments pick back up on Monday. So I look forward to that. And then in terms of the second part of the answer to this question, like thinking about tiebreakers in general and kind of really scoring systems in general, we now have like multiple levers to kind of experiment with, right? So one of the reasons I really wanted to do that XP showdown was we had never had the opportunity and to kind of see what it was like to drop a little bit of incentives away from the min-max opportunities on the platform, like race the lowest fees, race the, most balanced payout structure, double ups, or even top two. If we're doing a 6-horse tournament, like that's been the MO, right? Like drop into wherever you can have the absolute highest opportunity to succeed on a per race basis. What we saw with the XP Showdown was kind of twofold, right? There's still some tweaks that need to be made. There were a lot of double up stacking, trying to get around the new prohibited behaviors rules, like pressing the limits of what we're kind of allowing in that respect. But there were also a lot of benefits where, similar to what we saw in the C1 Premier, and for anyone who wasn't playing the game at that time, the C1 Premier basically allocated points based off of fee type, right? So if you raced a $500 entry, which were on the platform at the time, you would get way more points towards your final score than if you were racing $2.50 races. And again, there's some caveats there as well. But the XP system allows us to kind of capitalize on a similar methodology where if you are racing in higher fee types, you're fundamentally going to earn more XP. Sure, your placements are still going to be dependent, but we actually will see some level of distribution on horses racing where they feel like they would race if there wasn't any positive expected value overlay in terms of the tournament, right? So like, for example, some of the, top horses on the platform, of course, you guys are familiar with this, like Y2K, for example, right? Like the idea for Y2K is probably not to race $2.50 races until your fingers are bleeding on the keyboard, right? The idea is definitely, those top level horses, the 560s, the 570 pluses, we want them to feel like they're not being discouraged from racing where the stable owner is interested in racing, right? Like depending on, overall risk profile and things like that. So using XP as a potential tiebreaker is in the cards. Using XP as a scoring system is certainly in the cards with some potential tweaks in mind. But we're really trying to make sure that along the way of designing these live events, we're thinking about different ways to kind of score and batch together cohorts of horses so that we're not like unilaterally and one-dimensionally allocating the treasury towards the same cohorts who've been succeeding on the platform for a really long time. We want to be dynamic so that, when you come on the platform, you have something new to do. I think the Flash tournaments were kind of like the first time that I've been able to firsthand implement something like that. Having no idea what the tournament was leading up to, the hour before it started was kind of exciting, for me, even though I'm not playing, is like thinking about like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to like, I'm waiting, my time, it's almost 7:00 and I'm like, oh, what's it going to be? And then it comes out and you're like, oh, a 6-horse tournament. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Am I going to race top twos? Am I going to race winner take alls? What's the format going to be? And like that feeling of having to decide on the fly and make your strategy quickly is a level of skill that we're interested in bringing to the game in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of what has happened right now is like the game's been figured out in its current form many times. So like the more just quick decisions you can make really bring some skill back into the game. So I like that. And I think a lot of what you mentioned around like running Y2K, not at 250, where he kind of belongs, higher dollar, will align well with Facundo's vision of like aging, where if you're going to age out after X number of races, you may not want to waste them doing that. So you would hate to have tournaments that reward that kind of behavior if you're trying to make it available for all those horses. So I like that.
Right. Like the idea is to make it so we're not just targeting a specific set of behaviors with one tool, right? Ideally, if we're going to get, behaviors that are sustainable and incentivize for everybody, you want to make sure you're attacking those with multiple systems, right? So aging is one. And obviously I'm going to save that for Facundo because he could speak, more candidly on it. But from, the tournament design end of things, right? Like getting tournaments to be, format specific and, some other things that we'll touch on, I'm sure, throughout the call is kind of the goal, right? Like attacking it from multiple angles so that there's never a one-dimensional experience on the platform.
Yeah, love that. I like the intention around different types of tournaments because it needs to be well-rounded. You need to have, maybe you do have some of those $1, $2 race tournaments once aging's out there that I don't enter Ready, Set, Boom into because it's not worth aging him that much. And if that's the case, you're going to have like a beast-free tournament, which is good to have at times. So yeah, I like the idea. I like the intent and thought that's going into it. The other question I have is more around like site experience. I mean, there's some things, particularly around like the filter page, that I think just could be a little more user-friendly. And from an outsider's perspective, filters seem like they should be an easy thing to code in. So I'm thinking like 6 gate, 12 gate would be an easy one, or even like winner take all, top 2 double up. Some of that would be really user friendly as I try to sift through the 100 races that are in tier 1 and the site's always loading and jumping. I just feel like there are filters. If we get some of those filters, even like a sort button that says like, show me the races that are about to fill on top. Anything like that would benefit navigating the site quite a bit. So is that like in the roadmap? Are there any hurdles I'm not thinking of? Because it seems like it should be fairly easy.
Yeah. So, right off the cut, like they're absolutely in development. Like they're one of the top things, in terms of priority in my mind and in terms of the engineering team that I'm working with on them. The explanation for like kind of why it's, taking a little bit longer than, maybe we'd like to get those out, especially because there's already at least some bare bones level of filtering on the site. That kind of leads to the assumption like, oh, there's already filtering and sorting. Like, why isn't it instantly implemented? And kind of when I first came and started to think about expanding the overall race lobby in terms of, think about the things we have now that we didn't have before, right? Like races at every length, 4 different formats, free races and page running concurrently, multiple tier types across all formats, firing off all the time across 6 classes, right? Like I think at any given time, we have over 700 events on the platform, right? And that number used to be in the 200s and 300s. It used to be funnel rotation, 1 set per funnel. So for any fee type or format type, there might be only 3 events running at any time. So like that was the kind of legacy understanding of the infrastructure, right? Being able to handle X load. So when I came to the engineering department, I was like, hey guys, I want to really blow out race availability. Like I want to make it so if you log onto the site and you're looking for, a 1200 meter winner take all race and you're in class 2 and this is the fee type that you're interested in, you should be able to find that, right? And there should be a way for, anybody else to be interested in finding that as quickly as possible, right? That's like the time to fun that we always talk about. How quickly can you get into your desired event type? And, the caveat of expanding availability as massively as we have has been needing to essentially refactor the racing events page, right? So it needs some back-end work in order to make it load quicker with the underlying load that we've put on it, right? And that's not a small amount of work. It's actually been in progress for quite some time to make it so the events page will load quickly, especially when you start implementing filters and sorting, right? Like if you click any sorting or filtering, we want it to be snappy, right? We want it to come right up. We want you to be able to sort by, now we implemented the race from your My Stable page, right? So you could go to My Stable page, select the horse, select enter race, and it'll keep the horse toggled and you can enter multiple races in less clicks. Well, now, right, because we have that infrastructure, now the next step is how quickly can you get to the exact desired race, right? And in order to solve all of that filtering and sorting, that refactor needs to be completed. And every time we layer on an additional event type or, an additional fee type or X number of additional events, right? The conditionals, for example, have taken quite a large amount of resources to implement across all the classes, even though they're, extremely critical to the overall loop. Every single time we add something new from a live ops perspective, it of course is going to have engineering implications that are making it so, so now we need to make sure that there's conditional filters, right? Now we need to make sure that they're sorting for the number of entrants in a race, right? We want to be able to have the page load from top to bottom. If a race is 11 out of 12, it should be one of the first ones you see, right? And as soon as it goes to 12 out of 12, it should be off your screen, right? Mm-hmm. So there's certain things that need to be done in terms of the infrastructure and that refactor to make that possible. But once it's done, and it's going to be done in the first quarter of this year, like by the end of this quarter, you're going to be able to come on and have a snappy experience to be able to get to that race as quick as possible. And it'll also open up the door for any other potential quality of life fixes that are circulating around the events page.
Yeah, speaking of that, I mean, you mentioned the click on from your stable, you can click on the race button. I think a lot of people probably aren't even aware that I don't know if people are aware that it even existed. It wasn't very useful previously. My brother-in-law just brought it up to me yesterday. He came over for lunch and he's gotten deep into ZED, and he said it's awesome now. You click on it and it stays on that horse, and you can enter 4 races with that horse after clicking race from the stable. Still not that useful when you have a stable full of, hundreds of horses potentially,
Sure.
But something that I can see down the line is being on the events page and having like a little pop out where you could select the horse from there, and potentially even like, I think organizational things with the stable where I could say, I want to hide these 200 horses for I only want to see 10 horses that I'm looking at running today. Don't show me the rest, and just have a little pop out where you select that horse and enter. That kind of little stuff is the way I hope that things evolve. And I think you guys are already thinking about that kind of stuff, huh?
Yeah, definitely. And some of the stuff that you're seeing come live to the platform, like, is starting to set the stages for like a really thoughtful and intuitive first time user experience, right? Which is something that's on everybody's mind who plays the game, right? What's the new user growth going to look like over the course of 2023? And some of these infrastructure changes that we're making and user flows that are being designed might admittedly not be super useful if you've been playing the game for 2 years and you know exactly what types of things you're looking to do and you consider yourself like a top tier user, right? But at the same time, we want to make sure that there are an intuitive way to get to that first race, because the race events page can be a little intimidating, right? We have a lot of different formats. We have a lot of different fee types, and being able to go from the My Stable page, flow directly into a race. I'm not sure if you guys have created a new stable anytime in recently, but there's an entire new design. Yeah, entirely new design for how you flow into that first race. Some really amazing work being done by Jeff Hullock's team, who everyone's heard from the lending side. But since lending was completed, they basically moved on to that first time user experience. And I mean, the stuff that they're putting out is just really, really going to be powerful when we start to think about really attacking the onboarding push.
Yeah, awesome. Ryan, I'll cut this part out, but since we're running a little bit long here and Kevin's going to have to bail in 20 minutes, would you be able to stay on a little longer with me after so we can get to everything?
Yeah,
just wanted to make sure, like, decide which questions we're going to ask if you can. Okay.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Cool. We'll jump back in here then. All right. So next question we got for you, we got some kind of a little bit more fun stuff. We've gotten the admin stuff on the back end of the site out of the way. We want to talk a little bit about the future of tournaments and really Zed as a whole. So current tournament structure, it's evolved into these daily tournaments. You tried weekly a couple weeks ago. People maybe got a little bit burnt out on that. I guess we're kind of wondering how you're envisioning the future of tournaments. Is this a structure as they are here to stay, where it's Zed sponsored prize pools? I know there's been a lot of discussion about, pay $5 for sit and goes, and when they fill, they run. What are you envisioning the future of the platform? How do you make it more sustainable? Just generally, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, so, this is obviously a multi-pronged ecosystem-wide question, right? So, in terms of the current tournament cadence and, all of these new tools and things that have been pushed out in terms of, payout structures, payout ID types, round allocations, number of rounds, 6 horse, 12 horse, how many horses are advancing per round. We basically tried to make it so when we had some level of variability finally created and we could be as dynamic as we wanted with the underlying systems, then we were actually able to test the impacts of them and how they shift the motivations of the people participating in the events, right? Like, I've seen a lot of people think about like, oh, I wonder, how they simulate these things on the back end and, what types of horses they're putting into these different tournaments. And like, we can model point structures based off of, we could take 1,000 horses, put them into, 5 races apiece and see their, distributions against each other, who's placing where, who's doing what. But at the end of the day, that system is not really thinking about how does that first placement impact the decision of the stable owner in the next several races, right? So we really do need to, see some of these things live in real time. And again, what you touched on with live ops is like a perfect understanding of kind of how these systems work, right? Like, they're never going to be delivered in a situation where they're not able to be dynamically altered in order to create a better user experience, right? Like, the overall goal is we take all of the data from any different event type or any different type of format selection, and we identify exactly what's happening and exactly what the motivations are. I do as much as I can to gather as much sentiment analysis as I can in terms of how these different event types are received and things like that. But once we like basically fill out the tool belt, right, that's kind of where we're getting to, in my opinion. Like, we're extremely close to being at the point where we have a pretty decent understanding of which levers we can pull to activate different types of behaviors. the next step in my mind is to move away from kind of the horse specific design principles and more towards user specific and player specific and stable owner specific motivations and desires. Because at this point, right, like I could think, oh, I really want to, activate class 6. I really want there to be something for, people who are looking to play in those lower tiers and maybe have, pacers and horses from previous algorithms and want to participate. But like at the same time, those aren't gated by any means, right? If you guys so desired, you could buy up all the class 6 horses you want and attempt to monopolize any distribution of treasury down into that, right? What would work best is if we have some level of, okay, who's never won a tournament before, right? Like who's never even participated in a tournament before? Who's a new user? Who's on the platform for the first time, right? Like those are the types of ideas that we want to be able to activate in the future, because those create a more sustainable loop, right? Like when you think about all these different events, we're trying to see, who are the winners of all of these things, right? Where is everything going? Who are the net beneficiaries of different decisions and different formats that we create? And how does that create a more sustainable platform? So that kind of leads into 2 prongs, right? Engagement-based events, right? Where maybe it is a little bit of a grind, or maybe it is centered around finish XYZ objectives, right? Maybe race 2-3 times in each format. Exciting different opportunities that can change and are variable and dynamic. And the challenges system is something that we're going to utilize a ton in that respect. And then on the other end are trying to create like exciting multi-tier format events, right? Where, tournaments, I should say multi-stage events, right? Like the beautiful aspect of tournaments is that there are multiple rounds, right? So the allocation to that overall event compounds throughout your progression through the event, right? When you look at a 6-horse race, you could probably in 20, 30, 40, 50 races have a pretty decent understanding of, if I stayed exactly where I am, what's my success going to be like, in that specific format. Whereas in tournaments, anything can happen, right? We've definitely seen that. We saw it for sure with the XP Showdown. We introduced a level of variability with, different lengths for each quarterfinal or semifinal. And then the final was a round robin. I mean, my goal there was to make it as exciting as possible and as, in some ways unpredictable, right? Because that's where that excitement comes from. I remember when the, was it the C1 premiere that we did the round robin where, it was like the first time that there were like, horses racing 1,600 meters who'd literally never been there before. And then everyone sees the flames on the race and they're like, oh, what does it mean? What does it mean? Right. And like that additional layer of excitement and information impacts kind of how you perceive different events. And one of the things that happens with tournaments and like a super predictable cadence is it kind of loses that little bit of a luster, right? So in many respects, like if you woke up every day, right, and won the lottery and it was $100, sure, you love $100, right? Everyone wants to be able to get and some level of consistent money to them, right? Like that's a no-brainer. But at the same time, that day where it's 105 or 110 adds some different level of excitement. And we're trying to really just keep things away from being stale. And one of the levers that we have to pull there is that idea of trying to move away or at least implement some level of design that takes away from that qualifying experience, which can be a little bit one-dimensional, right? Like there's 5 races, and sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to be, what's the point structure today? What's the payout structure? And we're definitely working harder to get a lot of that on site in a way that's easily digestible. We want to be able to direct you to whatever exciting event is going on that day. But in many respects, having that level of being able to sit and go, right? That's something that a lot of people have been thinking about. Is exciting on both the player's perspective and our perspective, because they're extremely sustainable, right? They're self-funding. They're exactly like a 12-horse race, but just with multiple stages. We could take 192 horses, do a $5 entry fee, and then you're looking at almost $1,000 prize pool right there, right? And then distribute it as we would. Maybe even the quarterfinals and semifinals for some don't pay out. Maybe it's even a winner take all, 48 horses, put in $25. And then next thing you know, you're looking at, a 4-figure prize pool to pay out to the top horse on a 48, winner, top 3 move on. Then there's a 12-horse race, winner take all. And those are the types of events that we're super interested in, because we want to have there be a dynamic experience, right? So that's a level of engagement where maybe, you have 100 horses, or maybe you only have one horse, and maybe you're capital constrained, or maybe you're thinking about, stepping up into a tier that you're not used to, and making sure that there's some level of, understanding on what's my potential here, like what could happen, right? Is what keeps things really exciting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting to the point where, buy-in tournaments are certainly in development. We're doing a lot of design flow, trying to make them less of a kind of custom experience and more of like a native, intuitive experience, right? It should feel like entering a race. It should feel like, exactly what you're participating in and exactly how it goes. And then on the challenges side, really looking forward to trying to bring back some of the things that the Metaverse Cup made extremely popular, right? Like being able to, go for the most podiums you can, or go for the most wins, or try and record the fastest time, and additional layers of gamification that don't exist in that normal loop, and offer you the opportunity to do new and exciting things.
Yeah, I love that. I love the sit and go idea, especially because I've been thinking, like, I think Zed, the issue right now isn't necessarily when you lose money doing it, but it's that you're losing money and having to work just to lose money. Like the actual like button clicking experience just isn't fun, to be quite frank. Like the fun is what you described, where you're in these like unique environment races, these brackets, and you get to watch your horse like progress with the prospect of winning a bunch of money. So I think sit and go eliminates a lot of the work and just focuses on the fun, right? So I think people will be a lot more open to their current ROI situation if it didn't require all of this upfront work and then lose money, right? There's nothing worse than putting in a bunch of time that you're not enjoying and then losing money for it. So love that idea.
Right. Yeah. There's that feeling of, and it's super intimate when we try and do these 4-stage tournaments, right? It's a double-edged sword. On one end, we get more qualifiers, more potential participants in the tournament, and lower cut lines in many situations. But, if that quarterfinal or eighth final, or we're calling it, round doesn't work out for you because, whatever your individual outcome on that race is, what it is, that feeling of, oh, I just spent, all week, or I spent the last 2 days, or I spent all day today qualifying, and then, it's kind of a one and done experience. Ideally, like the first instinct is, I wish I could run that back. Like I wish I had another shot at that. And, quick hitting, multi-stage events are something that could accomplish that. And they also add a level of engagement with individual horses that might not exist in other ways. Like not everybody's going to stack into 8 paid races, or, double up on stamina every day. And, some people admittedly just want to come on and, stack into some opportunities. Maybe you only have an hour to play. Maybe, you're looking to check back and see how things go, but you still want that excitement of what the finals operate as, without having to necessarily participate in whatever the current loop is to qualify.
Yeah, I think having that variety for different types of players is the key. Seems like you guys are aware of that and working hard on it. That brings me to my last question. Then I have to actually dip out and get back to my real job. Sure. I think Donkey and you are going to carry on a bit longer, so I'll see that section with everybody else. But my question is, speaking of like the end game, or like what, like the future of Zed, say 12 months, 18 months from now. And for me, I'm curious about like the upper end of Zed. So like, what do you and Facundo visualize the top tier being? Is it going to be these high buy-in tournaments? Is it going to be like a Champions League where there's like actually like a season where you're grinding to the top, or are there going to be like sponsored events like Netflix? Just what is your vision and timeline for something like that?
Yeah. So in terms of the vision, like it's definitely multi-pronged as well, right? Like you think about, okay, we don't have any horses that are currently at the top of the game, right? No horses are currently at level 700. I honestly think Artois might be the top one, maybe 620 or something the last I checked. Wag me just, grinding away.
They double dip like no other. It's crazy.
Right. So like from that respect, we're not quite yet at the end game for the systems that we fundamentally designed, right? But so the time frame for that, kind of depends on the systems. Does XP need to be tweaked at some point? What's the underlying user growth situation looking like? those systems are always going to be managed by, the principal game designer and Facundo and the product team and I as a whole. But in terms of like what I envision that, I've always kind of envisioned it as being like, what do household names look like, right? Like, what does it look like to be, is it a household? Is it a horse that's the household name, or is it the stable owner? And when you think about like kind of blending into the esports world, right? When you think about what, NFT based gaming is really creating is like that level of asset ownership, like digital ownership, the fundamental principles of what we're trying to create here also add like an additional layer to, what it means to be an ultra competitive, top tier gaming, right? When you think about like kind of, let's say, competitive World of Warcraft, CSGO, like all of those extremely popular, even, League of Legends, all of those things. When you think about what top tier esports looks like, it often is a little bit agnostic of the in-game assets themselves, right? Like, oh, there's certain guns or there's certain characters who have a meta advantage over others. It's almost like chess in some ways where, it all comes down to, the skill of the individual wielder of whatever in-game, in-game character or utility they're using, right? What we need to balance is how do we have, that skill-based element of who can select, the best event types, identify the best racehorses in the game, who knows how to level the most efficiently, who can get them, who knows at top level where they should be participating in, what distance, what fee types, which competition they don't have an edge against. And also at the same time, wielding several different, horses at a time. In my mind, when we first started to play this game, I think a lot of us were thinking about, the top tier of the game is so horse specific, right? It doesn't matter who owns Breathless Edge. It doesn't matter who owns Ready, Set, Boom. They're always going to be dominant, right? I think where we're going is more of, we want to think about what is the stable owner's role in ZED, right? What is a stable owner able to do to elevate themselves to the top of the game, right? Because, when Facundo talks about the game being, a selection of choices, what we're really talking about is like, we don't want it to be where you have that horse from, 2021 that was identified and, has odds and you're the best using third-party software. You can run Monte Carlo simulations on third-party sites and, every single thing there is to know about that specific horse, right? So where to go. There's no, meta game for you anymore. You just deploy resources, right? We wanted to make it so when you get to that top level of the game and it's an exciting experience, I envision there being some level of, okay, here's the event type, right? It blasts right in front of your head. You need to quickly figure out what are my competitors going to do. Let's say there's a 12 horse race, right? And there's 12 stables participating. You all have, all of your entire stable at your disposal. Think about it like a deck of cards if you were playing like, I don't know, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, whatever it is, right? Like you get the race that pops out and you go, okay, it's a 2,200 meter winner take all, 3 rounds, whoever gets the most points wins. You're instantly going to have to be like, okay, which horse am I deploying here? I have a minute or I have 2 minutes, or I have to build my entire lineup for the entire event. And it really becomes less of which horses are racing against which, and you identifying, which stable owner you need to compete against in different ways. And then in terms of like, prize pools and how those things will be allocated, like a lot of it comes from the underlying ecosystem growth, right? Like it's no secret that without this being some level of, growing ecosystem where there's a lot of eyes on the product, there's a lot of people circulating in and out of the platform, there's a lot of participantship across all levels of the game, all of that kind of will create an experience where people are interested in what's going on and at the top and trying to become, up there themselves. When I first started playing, and I remember we bred Vanilla Bean, and my first thought was like, oh, who's the best stable in the game, and who's, competing in class 1, who's entering these $500 races. And, you get really used to knowing the horses. And then as you play for a long time, you start to think like, oh, who are the stable owners who are participating up there? Like, Wagny's entering my race, or, oh, there's an arbitrage horse in this race. Like, oh, should I, what am I going to do here? And is it something I can participate in? And that becomes even more intimate as there becomes positive expected value overlay in terms of sponsored prize pools, in terms of multi-stage events, right? If, there ends up being a 192 horse race where you enter for X amount of an entry fee, knowing what's going on and who might be interested in something like that and who you get matched up with in the quarterfinals is all going to be really important to that end game. And, in terms of like, we can control the systems that we implement, right? We can control the designs of events. We can control how the treasury is allocated in different ways in a sustainable way. But as we start to create these, first time user experience loops that feed into becoming an active player, that feed into you being able to progress, vertically through the underlying ecosystem, we'll start to see a lot more competitive nature across all aspects of the game, right? Like if you think about the number of horses who are above level 600, it's not a lot, right? But as we start to move, like think about how class 2 is, right? Class 2, those races are incredibly competitive. Like it's a glimpse on what the top level of the game will look like, because there's a lot of horses at level 500, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of races that come in with all horses less than, 10 away from 500. And things start to tighten, and it really does start to become, how are you managing which races you're entering and the competitive nature of who you're participating again. And we don't quite see that yet at the top level of the game because there's still so much to go. And it's going to be, an all out race to get there. And I'm excited to continue to see the progression of, household, like, if you play Zed, household stable names, Artois, Ready, Set, Boom, the horses who are just really quickly progressing through and trying to get there. And, we hope that along the way it becomes competitive and through all the things I mentioned before, we start to incentivize those horses to kind of compete against themselves more, and it becomes beneficial for them to do so instead of, funneling into wherever the tournament design is currently allocating. And, the format is what it is. And I got to be in $2.50 double ups because they're the only thing filling. Like we will start to see a lot more spread out through the ecosystem, especially as we onboard new users.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. And a lot to unpack. I got to bounce, but I'll let Donkey do the unpacking. Did want to say though, love the idea around like fast decisions and things like that. I mean, you can see how that formula has worked even like a game as old as chess, like you mentioned, right? They have bullet chess. They have ones where you have 3 minutes, you have 1 minute to do it. And that way you can't sit there and solve 10 to 20 permutations of how a game is going to end. And it just turns entirely into theory. You make it where like now the skill is interpreting the data as quick as you can and knowing the ins and outs as fast as you can. So I never thought about rapid style tournaments, but I like that. Reward the skill.
Yeah,
cool.
Definitely.
Kevin, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week to talk to Facundo.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
So, Ryan, everything that you just said, I guess the first thing that came to mind was the Netflix event, because that's exactly what it was, right? And for people that weren't around at that time, there was a Netflix sponsorship, and along with that, there was a $70,000 prize pool that came for one big race. And it was, what was the movie? What was the movie, Ryan? Do you remember off the top of your head?
The Harder They Fall, right?
Harder They Fall, right?
Idris Elba. And...
Right. Yeah. Good movie. Anyway, so you guys threw out, or I guess you weren't on the Zed team at the time. Zed team threw out this random race, and it was a 1,000-meter sprint, I guess, kind of fastest draw. And we didn't really know the details at the time. We just knew that something was going to be coming, and we would probably be interested in it. And it comes out, and it's like $70,000 prize pool, $3,000 entry. There's 12 gates, and it's 1,000 meters. And so it's like, first of all, do I have the funds, right? You got to have $3,000 in your account. Do I have a horse that makes sense? And like real quick math, it's like, well, there's a, $4,000 overlay here. The threshold goes down quite a bit. Of course, you're still risking $3,000, right? So you got to have some level of good horse, but that was exactly the decision at the time. It's like, I'm just going to throw a horse with variance in there. And some people threw some pretty questionable horses in the race, which made it,
oh yeah. I remember looking at some of them that got in because it kind of came like, I guess the idea of conceptualization there, because it was a Western, like the idea was quick draw, right? Like there's expected value overlay. The sharps who are going to enter a race like that, like are just going to be like, I just need to be in, right? I need the action. Like I got to be involved. And I guess that was kind of the idea of conceptualization, right? Like we had never seen an event type of that before. It's 10x, what the well, almost 10x what the highest event type on the platform is. Although we did end up running those 5K races as an experimentation later. That was over the summer, I believe. But
yeah, well, and that was really interesting because it brought another aspect of the ecosystem together, where people were like, I don't want to put 5,000 down, but I'd put 1,000 and find some other people, crowdsource for the other 4,000 and give them a cut.
that was super interesting.
Yeah, or if you had a horse that you knew was positive EV, like you could even take a cut over the entry fee from people. We didn't do that, but I think some people
well, it got like crowdfunded almost, right? Like some of the entry fees were crowdfunded by some of the best. I think only the sprint ran, or was it the marathon that ran?
Oh, I think the first time they all did. At least 2 ran the first
No,
time.
the sprint and the mid ran, and then the sprint ran again. So we ran 3 total, I think.
Right.
Because the marathon is like, obviously at that time before the new class system and the opportunity to progress up through the levels, like, was pretty dominated by Ready Set Boom, Artois, Breathless Edge, Grandeur in terms of engagement, etc.
For sure. So, I mean, I guess with this question, there of course is a lot of speculation, and we're talking about like your vision, one person's vision. And I think when we talk about stuff like this, it's important that like we're not putting it in a box, right? This is kind of the way you're thinking about it right now. I guess when I think about it, I always go back to what Facundo said on like the first spaces he did with Dan, talking about the World Series of Poker type events, and thinking of it, in some sort of like circuit where you have a horse and you have to go through these circuits to like get a qualification into the World Series of ZED or whatever. And, there's only 48 horses that make it into the World Series, kind of a thing. But I have no idea. And I guess you guys don't either. You're talking about one way that it could work, or one facet of it, right? There could be a bunch of different prongs to the high end. Ultimately, we just don't know where things go once the users are here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, it's easy, your mind wanders to like the dreamy situations where it's like, oh, how amazing would it be for there to be like $1 million race, right? Or $1 million tournament. And it all does tend to trend towards long form engagement styles, right? Like, obviously, if we do a week-long event, you're going to see those prize pools get boosted up, right? If we do a month-long event, you're going to see those prize pools get boosted up, right? So like, there is some level of time-based constraints that create those super large spectacles, right? Like, I think the C1 premiere was an entire month, and because it's entire month, that has some level of engagement requirements, and it targets a very specific set of players and racehorses for sure. And the goal is to make it so like at any given time there's a concurrent opportunities, right? Like, if we just had for this week only a tournament for class 1 550 pluses, right? And the rest of the classes, there's nothing for you today, right? That's not the experience that we're looking to have, right? We're looking to, one, identify all of the tools that we have in our belt, right? Everything that we've done from the live ops perspective, event formats, challenges, tournaments, things we have in the pipeline, and basically weaponize our ability to modulate the live game in ways that provide those opportunities to create really exciting different things, right? Like in terms of long form events, in terms of this is the best of the best. Like the XP Showdown was definitely conceptualized to be the best of each class. And looking through the qualifiers, like I knew every one of the horses in class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I looked through them and I was like, this is honestly who I expected to be participating in this event. And that was the idea, right? But at the same time, we want to make sure that everything is always having sustainability in mind, right? We can't just continue to deploy resources directly at one specific cohort, because it'll be very difficult for new players to join the ecosystem and understand what their vertical pathway to success is and what we're trying to motivate them to participate in. So when we think about, how to get to that $1 million race, or how to get to that $1 million tournament, or how to get into, I've thought in my mind, I've done the math, right? Like building a tournament isn't hard. You think about like, if you had 1,500 horses and everyone puts in, $10, or everyone puts in $100, or do we get to that stage where we can do those things that the sports books do, right? Like there's a reason on Sunday you go and there's, a DraftKings fantasy lineup where, there's, it's $25, you enter, and then you look and there's, 200,000 people who get to be involved, and next thing, or 200,000 entries, right? And then next thing you know, there's, $1.4 million prize pool, and the winner takes home, that 7 figures. So those are the types of models that exist outside of Zed that can be utilized in terms of creating these like huge opportunities to be, exciting and successful. But, we need to build the ladder to get there, right? We need to make sure that there's some level of sustained loop from both a live ops perspective and an underlying systems perspective. We're kind of doing both in tandem, where, I'm pushing the envelope for formats and different scoring systems and different event types and targeting all of that, while we're also building these like core engagement loop processes like XP, aging, and the other things that, Facundo will continue to allude to and talk to next week. They're the two heads of the snake, right? Like there's what's happening in front of you right now, and there's what's happening in front of you right now and what's being developed under the surface form that timeline to get us to that world where there's, a horse or a stable owner who takes home a 6-figure prize or takes home the opportunity to really solidify themselves amongst the historical, participants in Zed.
Yeah, I think our next question that really kind of ties into this topic as well, probably answered a lot of it here, but so there's like a cohort of the user base that saw these changes come out in Racing 2.0 and Breeding 3.0. They've been pretty vocal in criticizing Zed for, trying to bring this, equality of outcome or equality of opportunity, whatever they want to call it, saying that Zed is against high horse valuations. And, I guess I feel like from my perspective, before kicking it to you, it's like everything that you just said is an answer to that. But also you've got these other variables too, right? User-based growth. If there's like a rake and you've got 100,000 users and you're able to rake even like 2% of that, that's a huge piece of the pie that can go back into these large prize pools. And then sponsorship potentially. We already saw with Netflix, right? If you get Amazon come in and they want to have $1 million stakes race or something like that, that transforms everything. So there's all these different variables. Ultimately, it's how much a horse can earn that determines the valuation versus, this old system, very Ponzi, kind of like unsustainable. So you're talking about building the ladder. I guess just very directly wanted to ask you the question from being on the inside and being part of the conversations and the vision. Is that anything that Zed has discussed, like consciously trying to lower horse valuations?
No, because it doesn't happen in like a unilateral decision making like that, right? Because we have, when you think about developing a new game, right, there is always going to be like a product market fit, right? Like you're thinking about, we're designing this system, this is the way the game works. Here's the exact specific type of entry level user player tranche that we're interested in, right? Like when you design a free to play game, right, you're obviously trying to create a free to play game for people who aren't looking to deploy, $60 on Xbox or PS4 or PS5, whatever they're looking to do. You're looking for those people who are looking for engagement opportunities, right? The interesting thing about Zed as a product is that we appeal to a massive range of different styles, right? Like you could come in and literally pay $5 for something that, Z whatever in class 6 and grind it to class 100 or, level 100 and participate in only free races and maybe stack into 50-cent races, on the odd tournament, put $2.50 down to qualify. And then at the top of the game, like you could be, racing in $100 winner take alls, like over and over and over again, and deploying that level of resources and buying Z1s and buying the top racers or the highest level horses on the platform. So along that spectrum, we always need to be thinking about is there a way to go from A to B without having to have gotten lucky in 2021 or without having to deploy a massive amount of resources? Because if there's no target to get up there, then it does become that level of, there is only the top that exists and everything else is so granularly away from that it doesn't actually make sense to think that could be you, right? And that has pretty compounding ecosystem effects across everything. Like everything we tweak, everything that we're implementing, new features, new developments, we're always extremely, conscious of what the underlying ecosystem effects are, it would be silly of us to not, right? It would be silly of us to not think about, okay, how is the new breeding algorithm going to change underlying things, right? But like in the back of our mind, we're always thinking about right now, the most important thing is building a sustainable platform so that we can get to that level of starting to deploy the company's own resources, right? Not the treasury, like deploying our own resources into new user and player acquisition, right? Starting to do marketing, starting to do a really solid and conscious onboarding push. We've used that term a lot and thinking about, what does that take? Now we're getting there, right? Like we're building new user flows. We're building it so that when you come on, you're not looking at an events page like, what am I supposed to join? We're going to instantly let you loan a horse, right? You come on, we'll let you loan a horse. You can get into a race as quickly as possible, right? Internally, we track like conversion rates from sign up to first race, right? And we've made unbelievable progress on how quick you can get to that first race, because there's certain moments that are almost like the emotional connection gets built to the game, right? We need to start thinking more about what that system looks like that allows us to create a tether from I just joined to I've been racing, thousands and thousands of times, or I've been participating with Z1s and Nakamoto legendaries and level 500 pluses and engaging at the top level of the platform. There needs to be a consistent tether between those both. And they've been relatively disconnected for a really long time, right? Until the new class system came out, there wasn't really any level of, I just raced in Discovery and I won a race and now I'm in class 1, right? Like this horse, got a random variance pop and now I'm in class 1. And I'm not really feeling like there's some intuitive aspects of the game, right? So it seems kind of in many ways counterintuitive to think about the bottom level of the game, the entry level of the product in terms of fueling the entire upwards momentum and growth of the entire thing. But that is really how it works, right? Like you can't have a sustainable growing ecosystem if everything's so top weighted that it makes it the barrier to entry, even at the lowest levels of the game and entry levels of the game, completely, unrealistic. Because you're right, it really does come down to, if we want to have that massive prize pool, sponsors, eyes on the product, people talking about, Zed, going into bars and seeing races on the screen, or having any level of like mass marketability, it really does need to have some consistent tether from front to back or from top to bottom. And that will just fuel everything. So we never think about things in like that short term, are we destroying values? Are we doing this? Are we boosting the wrong cohorts? We're always thinking about which level of the product development cycle are we at? How is each new implementation and feature starting to build the groundwork for that sustainable top to bottom ecosystem? And then once that's built, what levers can we pull across the entire thing to start adding value across the entire system, using the treasury, using sponsorship funds if applicable, and using other mediums in order to make it so that there is something going on at the top that's not just, we have 12 stables, they're all willing to put down 5K of their own money, here's a 60K race and everybody watch. And then, one horse wins and we never run the race again, right? We want to make sure that when we get to that level of having huge flagship style events, that there's something we can capitalize on from a content marketing and product perspective.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's hopefully people are listening and feel a little bit more reassured that the direction of Zed is not so much. We don't know what it is ultimately. It's in process. You guys have a pretty good clear vision for what you want, but that end goal, like we'll see what it is in a couple of years, and that's kind of part of the fun. But I think there's people that verbally come out and say they're creating a mobile game to scale to 1 million users. Well, maybe, but that doesn't mean that's maybe that's class 6 and 5 and you can still have the high end potentially. We'll see. Or creating an arcade game. I think a lot of us came in thinking that Zed was going to be this simulation game, which ultimately maybe didn't mesh with a lot of the other aspects of Web3 and what you guys were creating here. And it seems to me that it's shifted into more of maybe like a resource management style game. And I think you've alluded to that here in the conversation. Is there anything else that you would add to that? Like, what do you see in a broader scope as Zed being? Like, what type of game?
Yeah, I think when I talk about there being like multiple different tranches of entry levels into the game, like by definition, that means that there's going to be different motivations and desires of whoever's participating in each tranche, and motivations and desires that inspire them to move up and down or throughout that underlying ecosystem, right? So when you think about like what does it mean to be resource deployment, and a lot of times that gets some slack because it sounds like or gets some flack, I'm sorry, because it sounds like, oh, we're just going to create a situation where the whales can just they have the most resources, so by definition it's a resource deployment game, they're going to be dominant all the time. But we've actually created this segmented system now where it's segmented in a reasonable and rational way, and we're as a company able to deploy resources on our own end to make it so there's some logical progression throughout those systems, instead of it just being this is a blanket tournament. And we'll touch on the idea of the Maiden and how that's going to evolve as a result of these concepts. Being able to kind of blanket target different areas and be like, oh, we want to make more class 1 participantship. Does it need an additional boost, right? So like real live ops, when it operates in all of its glory, right, is taking the data and understanding the motivations and how they change based on the different levers that we're pulling and the different tools we have in our belt. That's what we're getting to, right? It took admittedly some time to build the tool belt, right? And now that we have it, now we can really start understanding, engaging the impacts of the different decisions and levers that we pull, and starting to allocate resources on our own end in order to continue to motivate behaviors that build this underlying sustainable ecosystem.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Well, I think we're getting towards the end here, Ryan. We did want to kind of wrap it up with a teaser, hoping to get out of you a little bit of information on the first Maiden from Breeding 3.0, like what kind of format you're thinking. I don't know if you've locked in what format it's going to be, or you can kind of talk about what you're hoping to make it.
Excuse me. Yeah. So there's going to be a few fundamental changes to the idea of the Maiden, right? So for anyone listening that maybe wasn't around and maybe, was joined as a result of the new class system or returned, as a previous player, the Maiden in the previous class system was all kind of centered around discovery, right? And kind of entering your Griffin race. There was no segmentation by definition, right? If your new Z2 didn't go 5 for 5 in the Maiden, like, oh my God, I'm losing it, right? But now you actually have this opportunity where after one race, you get dropped immediately into your level segmented class. As a result, the Maiden is not going to count the Griffin, right? It's still going to be a prerequisite, right? Like you're still going to have to be unraced at the time of the Maiden beginning, right? So let's say the Maiden begins and immediately any horse who's unraced or bred during that time will be able to participate just as before. You'll enter the Griffin, and that will kind of be your seeding into the tournament, right? It'll be your placement into where you're going to be participating. Are you in the class 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 Maiden, right? And of course, prize pools will be allocated based off of, the distribution of horses being placed into each class, and obviously with proper incentives to encourage you to breed to your maximum potential, depending on what you're targeting, right? And again, I continue to talk about two things, right? Like how this is a game of choices, and how, from our perspective, and certainly from a live ops perspective, understanding the motivations of the players are really important to us. So when you think about the new breeding algorithm, when you think about super breeds, when you think about what the Maiden means as, how are you entering your new breed into the fold of the current, system against the horses who everybody knows who've raced thousands of times, right? You're going to be placed into your class, and then your performance in your class-based races are going to predicate your rankings in the current Maiden, right? And I'll leave the scoring systems and the payout structures and the prize pools for, the blog and the official announcement when it comes out. But the key concepts here are that for the first time ever, right, the Maiden is not going to be breed the best Z2 legendaries only, and those are the only people who are going to have some new opportunity to participate in. Class 3 is going to have a Maiden that's going to be, ultra competitive across different breed types. Class 2 is going to be definitely super competitive. We see a ton of horses getting bred into Class 2. So you're going to see these opportunities where someone's going to step onto the stage as a newly bred horse and have an opportunity to succeed outside of the same cohorts who've succeeded in the Maidens for the, since their inception. It's been a lot of the same stables, the same people who, can breed at the top, who already have the best horses, breeding 2.0, the previous breeding algorithm definitely supplemented that in many ways that, maybe aren't super keen for how the Maiden is designed. But now it's going to really be like selection-based opportunity. If you want to have the best potential in the class 4 or class 3, whatever Maiden it is that you're targeting with your specific profile, you're going to make those breeding decisions and analyze that Griffin outcome, very intimately for how you're going to participate in. There are some other intricate details. Is it going to be paid racing? Is it going to be free racing? It's definitely going to be free racing for at least the first Maiden. We want to make sure that, we offer those opportunities for, your breeding to be, in your mind, rewarded by the opportunity to participate in the event. You can kind of almost think about your breeds as being the entry fee, right? It's, we've had Maidens be kind of centered around, breeding is your initial input into what's actually happening in terms of your qualification potential. And then the outcome of your races will be that way. I'm really hoping, like I mentioned, we'll have the best of scoring. And again, I'll leave all the specific intricate details for how the tournament will be designed for the actual blog so that everyone can kind of look through and understand that better. The size of each individual Maiden for each class will probably vary depending on, the distribution of unraced horses. Like, we're not going to have a class 6 Maiden with 192 horses if there's only X amount of horses being bred there. And we have some exciting things in our mind, depending on, what the data is showing with how many unraced foals are in each class, right? If like class 6 has, 30 unraced foals, like it might be 6 horses only qualify in each class, right? Or in each funnel down in class 6. And it really just becomes like a best of the best down there. But yeah, I'm really excited for the Maiden because there's nothing better than that feeling of kind of that new horse discovery, right? I think that's like one of the biggest emotional moments that connect you to the game, because there's something about, sure, everybody wants to own Princess of Power, Ready, Set, Boom, and feel what it's like to just succeed no matter what you do, click a button and you're going to win a race. But that again becomes one-dimensional, and there's something about that new discovery, especially in this new system where, we have these opportunities where if you breed a 450, a 451, your first thought is, oh, I have to race against the 500s, or oh, I'm just outside of the conditionals, et cetera. But like now in the Maiden, a 450 is not that bad of an outcome, right? Like you're going to have the opportunity to participate. You're a mid-tier, sure, but if you have a nice tournament run, you certainly have the potential to participate there. And you get to have some positive expected value overlay that encourages you to discover some horses that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise continued to discover depending on the breeding outcome. And I think that the end goal for us will be to form like a more intimate relationship with how the new breeding systems work, how progression works, how the level-based class system works, so that you kind of get that feel of this is why Zed designed this like this, right? This is why certain types of behaviors are incentivized on the platform, and this is why conditionals exist, and this is why you should class up when you have the opportunity to. That's kind of like the end goal for kind of all event types, but certainly the Maiden being centric around breeding.
Yeah, I mean the this is why question is really the missing piece for almost the entirety of the time that I've been in Zed is like communications. Like we don't understand. Okay, we got these new breeding fees that come out. Why? We like I think that there's some really in-depth thought behind the structure, but we don't have the why, and there's no outlets for you guys to have like a product call or something like that and describe, here's what we're thinking. I don't know if it's right? Like this is how we approached it and what our thought process. Well, we were thinking about something and we were just kind of throwing shit at the wall. And I think that it's gotten better over time, right? If we look back to 2021, when there was Zed was just like a dead zone. We didn't hear anything from the Zed team for like 2 months. Breeding was down. It was like the darkest days. It's gotten a lot better. And I guess wrapping up this conversation with you, Ryan, I have like kind of a message to the community, because you and Facundo have come in, and actually John Lee, say whatever you want about what he designed and stuff like that. He came out and he put himself out there in communications to the community on social media. He explained what he was doing, his thought process, and he was kind of a front facing part to Zed when there wasn't there. So everybody loved it. And you and Facundo have slid into that when we didn't have that for so long, where there's no formal structure for these things to be communicated and these type of clarifications. And from my point of view, you guys have done your best to try to communicate and help everyone see the vision and buy into it, because that's so important for us to grow the user base and have a positive community where we're all on the same page. I think there's a part of course, everybody gets frustrated when things aren't the way that they were. A lot of changes going on. It maybe isn't what they saw as their vision. And you guys are easy targets to project those feelings and those thoughts at, when maybe some of it's your guys' fault. Maybe it was your vision, but there's a whole organization that you guys seem to be the easy outlet for, almost scapegoats for every single thing that is maybe not happening functionally in the organization. Like any young upstart company that has, I think, kind of groundbreaking vision that they're bringing to us. So all that said, like, I really appreciate you guys putting yourselves out there. I can understand, like, anything in social media, there's like a lot of bombardment of negativity, and that can wear anybody down. So I hope that everybody out there understands that. Please hold back at least a little bit and express your feelings and thoughts respectfully, so people like you don't get burnt out and just, disconnect and not communicate, because that you could easily do that, right?
Yeah, I try to find the balance, and it becomes interesting because I have kind of like a persona that's shifted in many ways when I had to kind of get behind the curtain, right? So as a player, and definitely as a a product developer for Know Your Horses, like, we had kind of built the entire site on being this very quick moving, Tyler is an incredibly talented developer, so we were able to like fire out new features as quick as we can. Like, he would stay up all night just to get, profit and loss charts, different, heat maps and things like that we felt like were cutting edge at that time. And I built kind of an understanding and connection to, the community as that person who would be able to help build whatever they needed at any given time. And the reality of the situation at now behind the curtain at the company, and trying to do things with the long-term health of the game in mind. Like, a lot of the stuff we did with KYH, we weren't really thinking about long-term impacts, right? If a player was like, oh, I'd love to see profit and loss, the next thing in my mind was like, of course, yeah, we'll build it right now. Right. And we built it right now. And then, like, the next day, all of a sudden, Tyler and I pull up Arbitrage Racing's profit and loss chart, and we're like, people need to see this. Like, this is incredibly impressive, right? And then in some ways that kind of spiraled into basically building the metagame, right? All of a sudden, it's like, how is Arbitrage doing this? And then downclassing becomes like this fundamentally important aspect of having success on the platform. So, like, something that, when you're really young kind of organism and design, right? Like, KYH was kind of like this ectoplasm of, throwing different features together without like real, solidified product development pipelines. Tyler and I just building as quickly as we could to support the bigger vision of where we saw the ecosystem in the game going. Now everything's, from my end, much more intimately connected with like real systems, like making sure that everything we're doing is understood on how its implications are for the long-term aspects of the game. And there's only so much that we can speak of at any given time, right? Like, we have things changing all the time on our end, right? There's certain systems that don't work the way we intended, or do work the way we intended, or require certain modifications. So, when you think about like product development roadmaps and things like that, of course we have them internally, right? Like, we all know where our goalposts are and what we're trying to do. That's, any logically developmental company is going to have those things in place. But in terms of like externally communicating exactly what's happening, I promise you, Facundo and I have really done our best to kind of paint that vision. And when we know for sure that something is exactly working as we intended, and coming out and going to hit those marks that we're trying to get it to, we're doing our best to explain those systems in full, right? Like, you're talking about, the director of product and the assistant director of product sitting in Discord and going on Twitter. And that's one of the beauties of Web3, right? Like, that building in public and having that opportunity to get access to the people who have the ability to make the decisions that impact the product that you love and are really interested in. And of course, there's going to be both sides of the coin there, right? I'm not naive enough to think that the decisions that we make that in our minds are best for the overall health of the game are going to lead people astray or not necessarily meet their exact expectations or vision or things they have. And change is always going to be difficult, right? If anyone who's been playing this game since April and May of 2021 know that just as well. But we're always constantly thinking about how we can make this sustainable, growing, and really exciting and fun to play. And that's our primary motivation. And we are always thinking about that in our engagement and dissemination of information to any of the players. And yeah, I appreciate you with the kind words, but yeah, I do my best to definitely digest as much feedback as I can from as many avenues as I can. That's one of the things that made Know Your Horse is what it was. My, constant kind of saturation of, what's the life, what's the heartbeat of Zed right now? What are people saying in Discord? What are people saying on Twitter? What's the overall sentiment? And it's a constantly, moving organism, right? Like there's people, sometimes Twitter is like the most positive place on the planet. Sometimes Discord is, sometimes they're not at all. And sometimes we do have to do our best to weed through a lot of noise, but we've gotten a lot better at basically just feeling what the current vibe is, so that we understand how certain product development features will be, received and how we're kind of building the building blocks of our systems and the impact that player motivations and desires have on that.
Yeah, and I think people see that you guys take that vibe and kind of respond to it, and I think they interpret that as maybe, oh, we need to throw a fit and be disrespectful and stuff like that, versus if a bunch of people came out and respectfully communicated an issue that they saw, it would maybe be more effective. You hear it quicker from my point of view. So yeah, I know you guys aren't perfect. I don't want it to come off as me kind of jerking you guys off, but no, I appreciate that we have some communication, having been here for so long and seen other eras where it's just crickets for months and months. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Ryan. It's been awesome. We took a ton of your time. I'm sure you got a lot of stuff to get back to. People can follow you. We're out on Twitter. What's your handle out there?
Yeah, just Ryan Trost, full name.
Trost, right?
Trost. Yep.
And I guess I should correct. You said assistant director of product just now, right?
Yeah. It's kind of that U.S. versus Australian.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Zed Twitter account said associate, so I didn't know if I was messing up your title. Cool.
No, it's kind of interchangeable.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on, Ryan. Hopefully we can get you back, in
for sure.
a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. Whenever you got time, maybe make it somewhat of a regular thing.
Yeah, like I said, we have a bunch of things coming, obviously from the live ops perspective and obviously from just a general product pipeline perspective. Looking forward to the Maiden, looking forward to Facundo's talk next week. He's going to obviously give a ton more information on these key underlying systems and where we're going in terms of broader vision. But yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on and thanks for letting me fill in.
For sure. Yeah. And thanks for bringing up Facundo, his appearance next week. You guys will want to subscribe to the show on YouTube, the Arbitrage.Run show, so you get a notification when that episode comes out with him and any future episodes with you guys. You can follow me out on Twitter at ZED.Run. Kevin is at Arbitrage Racing, and we will talk to you later, Ryan. Take it easy, man.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you.